So welcome to the fifth video in the introduction to the A-level English language AQA specification language levels, and this fifth one is on pragmatics. So before we begin then, just as usual, a quick refresh on what the language levels are. The language levels are a framework that we use pretty much throughout the whole of the English specification to investigate language, and they consist of phonology and prosodics, which was covered in the first video, lexis, which was covered in the second, semantics, which was covered in the third, grammar and morphology, which was the fourth video, pragmatics, which will be the topic of today's video, and graphology, which will be the final one in this series before moving on to textual analysis. So pragmatics then, what are we dealing with here? Well, pragmatics is the part of linguistics or language that's concerned with the language that we use and how this is influenced by the contextual factors or the situations in which we find ourselves. I use the image of a toolbox on the opening slide. So, what tool do we use? What tool do we need to use for the situation? When we're looking at words, when we're listening to them, or when we're reading them, we do far more than just decode the semantic meaning of the words. And if you're not sure on semantics, check back on video number 2 for detailed information about semantics. So we're doing something far more than that. So let's put that into operation, see how that works. First of all, though, key terms that we're going to be dealing with this time. Thankfully, there's not quite as many as on the last video. So we've got embodied knowledge, schemas, cotext, cooperative principle, conversational maxims, implicature, positive face needs, negative face needs, face-threatening acts, politeness strategies, deixis, deictic categories, proximal deicsis, and distal deicsis. And so let's deal with the 4 aspects of pragmatics then, see what we're going to be dealing with. So as mentioned, we'll have a little bit on deixis. We'll deal with the politeness strategies. We'll look at how your background knowledge influences the pragmatics and the understandings of what you're reading or listening to. And we'll have a look at Paul Grice's conversational maxims. So these are the topics we're going to cover over the next few slides. So let's take this for example. Let's say this were on a website and the caption below the image was "Alligators are taking over America's golf courses." How would we actually go about understanding that? What would be the pragmatics involved in that context and situation? Well, to decode this, you need to know more than the denotation of alligator, the denotation of taking, the denotation of America, and the denotation of a golf course. You need to be able to do much more than that. So when you see the word alligator, in this instance, various things are going to spring to mind more than just the name of the animal, more than just a definition of what an alligator is. This might be influenced by you knowing something about reptile biology, if you take A-level biology. It might be influenced by your knowledge of Florida's geography and topography, if you visited the place. If you're a golf player or a keen golf enthusiast, then it might be influenced by your understanding of the landscaping of golf courses. So there's a whole range of knowledge that we bring to any word. Some of that may be what we call embodied knowledge, and your embodied knowledge about alligators may be gained from visiting a zoo and seeing them, or maybe you've been to the Florida Everglades or visited New Orleans and the swamps down there and seen alligators. So you've gained some first-hand knowledge. But a lot of the meaning of that word alligator, certainly in this instance, relies on a range of contextual knowledge. The kind of knowledge that's triggered for an individual is called a schema. So we know golf courses aren't the usual habitat for alligators, and we know we don't usually play golf in swamps, bayous, or Everglades. So in this instance then, what we're using is the cotext, the words that are around alligator. Clearly not everything you know about an alligator is relevant to this story. You don't need to know an alligator's body temperature. You don't need to know their reproductive habits. You don't need to know their food source, unless that happens to be golfers. So we narrow down the meaning. We take the context of what this language is appearing in and around to narrow down the meaning. Okay, let's talk for a minute now then about conversational maxims and communication as a cooperative enterprise. So this is based on the ideas of this gentleman, and he's the linguist philosopher Paul Grice, and he explained that language exists according to a cooperative principle. We're kind of negotiating as we're conversing. And the way this is achieved is through what he called 4 conversational maxims, or kind of rules that we apply when we're having conversations. And he noted that these shouldn't be seen as, absolutely fixed, and we must always do these. And in fact, sometimes when they're broken, they create implied meanings, or what we call implicature. So let's have a quick look at what Grice had to say about the 4 maxims. So the first one then is the maxim of quantity. And basically this means don't say too little or too much. So, you need to judge how much you need to say for the situation. Then there's the maxim of quality, and that means always speak the truth. Whatever we say should be factual, should be verifiable, should be accurate as far as is possible. And then there's the maxim of relevance, which means we stick to the topic. And you'll see that children quite often break this. When you have a look at child language acquisition, you'll see that quite often children break the maxim of relevance. Quite often they break the maxim of quantity as well. One that they rarely break is the maxim of quality. But as I say, we'll deal with that with child language. And the final one then is the maxim of manner. So you should be clear in what you're saying and avoid ambiguous statements. So the listener or the person you're conversing with should understand what you mean by what you're saying. And we'll see an example of how that's kind of played with in the next slide. On this slide then, let's have a look at how maxims get broken and how implication or implicature works. So speaker A asks speaker B, did you enjoy your lasagna? To which speaker B replies, I think I've still got room for dessert. So have a think about that for a minute. And in another situation, speaker A, talking about the Marvel series of films, says, isn't Avengers Endgame a great film? And speaker B says, well, they certainly didn't stint on the special effects. So what's going on in these instances then? So in the first example, we're breaking the maximum of relevance. We're not talking about dessert at this point. So what's the implication here? What's the subtext? So is the implication that speaker B didn't enjoy the lasagna that was cooked by person A? They've kind of shift the topic by changing the relevance of it. In the second example, the maxim of manner is being broken. So did person B admire the film and think part of the greatness of the film was the level of special effects and they totally amazed them? Or did they actually hate the film and think it was all spectacle and no story? Without the intonation, we can't really tell. And even sometimes with the intonation, we can't really tell. So it's not entirely clear what they're trying to say there. So moving then on to the politeness principles. We'll cut that out. So moving on to the politeness principles then. And apologies for a couple of things appearing in advance. But so politeness principles then, based on the ideas of Irving Goffman, and suggesting that one of the chief ways in which we support each other in conversations, and perhaps it's even more important than Paul Grice's Maxims, is how we manage conversations in a way that's sensitive to other people's personal, or what he called face needs. And so what are these face needs then? Well, there are positive face needs, which is our need to feel appreciated and valued by the other person when we're in conversation with them. Or there are negative face needs, which are the need to feel independent and not imposed upon by somebody. And if you've been in a meeting with managers, you'll know quite often they ignore those face needs. So any exchange between one and two, not between one person, between a couple of people or even a group, has any exchange in there has the potential to be what we call a face-threatening act, something that will threaten their need to be appreciated or valued, or threaten the need to feel independent or not imposed on. And so we try and manage conversations in a way to avoid this happening as far as we possibly can. So how might we go about this? Let's kind of work through an example of the pragmatics of this. So imagine a couple, husband and wife in this case, lying in bed. One wishes to go to sleep, but the light from the other's phone and the tapping sound from the other's mobile phone, or the swiping, it's interrupting them, it's stopping them from sleeping. Saying something is likely to threaten the face needs of the phone user. They're going to know their actions are not appreciated. So that will interfere with a positive face need. So they won't feel appreciated. And they will also feel imposed on, as they have to submit to the person who wants to go to sleep. They're going to have to submit to their wants or wishes. So that's going to interrupt the negative face need. So let's see what the possible options are here. So asking for the phone to be turned off so that it can go to sleep is potentially a face-threatening act. Okay. So option one then is we can make a direct request. We can say, turn that phone off, I'm trying to get to sleep. So usually that's quite impolite. Usually we avoid that kind of direct request unless we're angling for an argument. We can make an indirect request. We can get the same message but do it with a little bit more politeness. So we can say, oh, for some reason I just can't seem to settle. Aren't you tired yet? That might be another option. So we're not actually saying what we want, but it's kind of indirectly being suggested. So moving on to the politeness strategies then of Goffman. So this potential face threatening, we can avoid it by politeness. So we can do a positive kind of face need being supported. So we can make them feel appreciated and valued and say, it's great you follow the news. Can we go to sleep now? So you're taking a positive quality, you're acknowledging it in them, but you're getting your request in. Or we can do a negative version. We can fulfill the negative face need and acknowledge that we're imposing on them. We can say, I'm sorry to ask you this, but could you? So that would be an example of negative face need and how we manage that with politeness. Of course, the most polite thing we can do, but the most submissive thing probably, is just say nothing. And that way we don't threaten face at all. So we can avoid that potential face threatening act. Let's move on to deixis then. So it's one of the complex ideas. Sometimes takes some time to get used to it, and it's not always needed. It's not always essential, but it simply means that the meaning of the words depends on who's using them, where they're using them, and when they're using them for their meaning. So if I say I'm here today, the deixis of that is at this moment it locates me in my front room in Southampton on the 11th of May 2020 in yet another week of lockdown. So this is kind of moving outward from me. So the person deixis is moving centrally from me. So where names and personal pronouns are being used a lot, you can talk about person deixis. We can also talk about spatial deixis, where we're going to see lots of adverbs of place. So orientation words like up, down, left, right, place words like here or there. So there we'd be dealing with spatial deixis. And we can also deal with temporal deixis. And here you're going to be seeing lots of adverbs of time, such as yesterday, tomorrow, today, next week, etc. So we can orientate where the speaker or writer is in relation to the audience. And quite often, deixis are used when speakers are sharing the same time and space, since they can point to objects and events that can be understood because the person understands the context, they're there with them. We've got two ideas here. We've got proximal deixis, where events, things are close to the speaker. They're referring to things in the immediate vicinity, time-wise or spatial-wise. Or we've got distal deixis, which is further away from the speaker. So that's the difference between here, which would be proximal deixis, and there, which is obviously further away. This, which is proximal and close. That, which is further away from the speaker. As I say, so don't worry too much about deixis. We don't use it that much. Concentrate more on the politeness strategies and the positive negative face and the maxims that Paul Grice devised. That would be the best advice for dealing with pragmatics. Thanks for listening, and final one on graphology will be coming up in a week or so.